Calling all pitchers and pitching coaches, PITCHSTOCK 2024 is your destination for revolutionary pitching education and information, from the newest technology to advances in biomechanics knowledge to take-home strategies and application for making your pitchers better today. Join us August 8th and 9th at the Westin O'Hare in Chicago. Experience transformative sessions led by leaders from the college game to technology companies to player development experts. Use promo code OGX Podcast to take an extra 10% off. Visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchstock. Again, visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchstock and use code OGX Podcast to take an additional 10% off. Spots are limited, so secure yours today. All right, we are back for another episode. Last week, everyone listened to me solo, and I told you that the full crew would be together, and it just sometimes doesn't happen. So you get me and Ashley this week. Me from Colorado, Ashley from being a mom all day and dealing with sick kids. So we gotta do what we gotta do to get this to get this done and to make you guys hear our voices. So. We were going to start today by talking a little bit, obviously, like transfer portal and NIL. These are all the buzzwords, about our game right now. We saw, obviously, Nija's in the portal right now, and that was a big one for everyone, big point of conversation. And I think just like maybe touching on this a little bit in, from our side of player development, both I think at the high school level as you're prepping for that stage, at the collegiate level, what that looks like. This stuff impacts coaches we work with, athletes we work with. It's different. I think there's an element of like, you can say whatever you want about the transfer portal or NIL, but like, it's different. It's different than when we played, and there's a level of like acceptance we all have to have around that. And I think from my standpoint, a little bit, I guess, what I would sort of say about it is I don't think it changes anything of my like values and beliefs about what you should be thinking about as you're going into, the next stage. If anything, I think this, watching this sort of change made me more steadfast in that, which is, one of the hardest things I struggle with as someone who's on the team side right now and also player development side, is that so often we see athletes in that stage like letting the process run them instead of them run the process. So they're like, they're letting their travel coach be the determiner of where they go and who's seeing them, or whoever sends them a camp invite is now suddenly who they're interested in, or whoever talked to them. And I often, when I see these athletes lists, will be like, what does school A and school B have in common? Like these schools couldn't be further from each other. And so why are these both on your list? And trying to really hone athletes in on like, you got to steer this ship more yourself in this process and really understand what you want. And I think to me, the sort of temporary, the more possibility that a situation you will enter is more temporary, could be more temporary, whether that's because the coach changed, whether that's because you ultimately decide to leave, whether that's because, someone like Nija impacts, Stanford, the coaches, but she also impacts her teammates. The structure of their team changes as she leaves. And so I think when you are impacted by that, what sort of guides you in the decisions you make? And I think if you haven't remotely steered that ship, both in who you are as a player, what you're looking for in a school, what you're looking for in coaches, what you're looking for out of your experience, that process becomes so unsettling. And we've seen that, for the athletes as they go through that, whether they're, like I said, whether they ultimately are just unhappy and they're determining whether they want to go into the transfer portal, whether their coach leaves, whether a few of their key players leave. When you don't know what you're looking for out of that experience, or you're shaky in that process is just, it can be a lot, it can be really heavy and it can be a lot. And so I think from my standpoint, first and foremost, I would just keep going back to, steer your own ship And I think there's a lot of ways you could take that and what that means, but I think it's even more important now. That doesn't mean be selfish, right? I think that there's like, but or I guess inappropriately selfish, but steer your own ship in what do you want? What's going to make you a better player? What do you need out of the experience? And the more solid you can be in that, I think the better you can handle the sort of, trying times when you reach a situation like this.
I think what's really difficult is that, they're kids, and so I think like, I don't know, when I like reflect on that time when we were 15, 16, 17, it did kind of seem, and maybe this is just my view and my perspective from like my own little bubble, but it did feel like, at least in my family and the area that I grew up, that we were being asked to be a little bit more mature about our decisions. Like it was important to be thinking about like what you wanted to do and how far away you wanted to go from home. Like you had to really like know before making that decision. I do think the world now is harder because of the like pressures of travel ball, the pressures of social media, the pressures of like, of announcing where you're committed to. I often think about like, okay, if social media platforms were what they are now, if that was the case when we were growing up, like, would I have felt confident in my decision? If like it was so frowned upon to go to play Division 3, if you had the opportunity to play at Division 1 level, like, would you feel as confident in those things? I don't know. So I definitely think there's this world where the like current pressures of the game, which obviously you just kind of spent some time talking about. I think you said last episode, Krista, but like the pressures of the game, the like everyone weighing in, it kind of keeps athletes and kids, they're kids, from being able to like really anchor their decisions probably in the right choices. I just think now more
how
than
many
ever,
times have we heard parents say like, and girls, like, we just want to be done with this process. Like it will all be easier when we're done.
Right. It's like, it's not.
And right. And you and I are like done. Not done. All you've done then is say where you're just like,
you're never done. College. It's never done. Right. So it's like, so I think it's sort of like calling all parents, like it's really time to like step up and to help lead this for your athlete, for your kids, because no one knows these kids better than their parents, hopefully. And to really like help them make solid decisions that are about like their insides, in order to make a good decision. Because you're right, it's likely at this stage that they're going to get to a place and it's going to shake while they're there. Meaning it's not just like, oh, they thought they were going to, have this level of accomplishment and they didn't. Like that has always existed and always will exist, but like who they committed to playing for, the teammates they thought they'd be surrounded by at this stage, there's a good probability that that's all going to shake. And I think, the world is about, life really is about like a giant reminder one after another that it doesn't go as planned. It's really about your ability to respond to when something is not what you expected, and respond and stay anchored in you and your values. And so I think it's just another example. Like, do I like the state of the game right now? I know it's complicated because I think it's great that we have NIL. I think it's great that, women, female athletes are being elevated. I think all that's great. So it's not a black and white answer, but do I love the state of the game? If someone said you have to pick a side, the way it was when you played and the way it is now, I probably would choose back then, only because I really do have like kind of an old school soul when it comes to the game and of sort of like what the game is supposed to represent in your life and what it's about. But I do think that, it's just the nature of what it is now. And I think now more than ever, we have to really prepare athletes of like, you're not making a decision for your announcement on Twitter. You're not making a decision for the social media and the highlights and ESPN. And even though those things are amazing. And we every day are advocating for our athletes to play at the highest level if they can and want them to be seen and there to be visibility. I mean, think about like Katie, how exciting that was, how much she deserved that, how much this last week or 2 weeks ago, I videoed a little kid in our facility, like asking her to autograph her jersey. There's some really special things about that. So I'm not knocking it. So I mean, it's not really black and white, but at the end of the day, the decision really can't be about that. And,
right.
you know, because like, it's just so, yeah, there's just so many moving parts. And I think otherwise you're just set up for disappointment in your career. And at the end of the day, your career really is about like feeding who you are. The game is really just about like, there will be a time in your life where you'll reflect of like, I was an athlete at the college level, you know, beyond at the professional level, but that chapter will end and like, here's who it helped me become. And that's just like staring, I think, athletes in the face a little bit stronger and a little bit sooner now, because yeah, otherwise they're just sort of hopping all over the place. I mean, when Nija's announcement came out, I definitely was sad. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Do I think she deserves to make that decision? Do I think she is like, you know, she's the best pitcher in the country and absolutely should play wherever she wants, should get paid for it? I do. But I also was very sad. I was very sad for the game. I think she deserves to make that choice, but I was very sad because I'm like, oh, we really are here. Like, we're here where the game is just not, and that's not Nija's responsibility to be like the representation or the representative of the game in a former time. It has nothing to do with that. But yeah, I was sad. I felt really sad. I was also like, damn, as someone that's like a real academic minded type of person, I'm like, damn, I would have died for a degree from Stanford, you know, like there's something so special about that. Now she's just an extreme example because of how great she is, where her livelihood might not be centered around her degree from Stanford. Right. So, you know, there's a reality to all of that, but beyond her personally, I think her situation really just represented the state of the game. And I don't want to see it as negative because that's not fair. You can't it's not negative because it's intertwined with a lot of positive. But I do think it is time now for the parents, for the adults to step up in this process, really see that it can't just be about, things that are more externally driven. It can't be about, for the external validation. Now more than ever, if we really want our kids to feel happy and to continue to build the resilience they need and to be adjustable and adaptable once they get there, you're right. They've got to be rooted in the right decisions. I just think that's really hard for athletes to do on their own. They're 16 years old, so I think it's time for the parents. And that scares me a little because, we're parents. We don't not little kids, of course, but in our experience, if someone told me you get to sit in a room with 5 athletes and have discussion about things versus 5 parents, I'd choose the athletes. I feel like there's so I would choose the athletes. I feel like they have this level of honesty, authenticity, vulnerability still. And sometimes I feel like, oh, the parents, it's no fault of their own, but they're it can be long gone sometimes. So we take a lot of pride.
Which is hard. I think it's hard for them. The comment about wanting to be done, so much of that comes from watching the pressure their kid is managing, and also the parent is managing, because social media and the pressures are just as relevant on the parent, and not wanting them to have to go through that. I've had a lot of conversations over the past 3 years, especially as it's just gotten heightened and heightened and heightened from social media, from what U Sports puts on it, from all of this, of my kid is really struggling. Her journey is not going the way she thought it would. And here's all, she's having mental health issues. She's having, layers and layers. And I've had, I think that's been one of the most negative parts of the past few years for me coaching is, because I want to just be shake them and be this isn't, this isn't your whole story. What you commit, what are we doing? We gotta curb, we gotta change what we're talking about. This isn't who you are. No one is, this isn't this shouldn't be that heavy. And I'm not discrediting your feelings because I know why it feels that way. And we have travel ball teams that kick people off if they don't commit to a Power Five because they can't list, some school on the sheet. And, there's a lot of layers to it, but I think, at the end of the day, just continuing to get back to that. And what I don't think that means is that then, I've had on the opposite end of that, once kids go, I also have been on the receiving end of phone calls of, I'm unhappy. I'm thinking about going in the transfer portal. Like, let's talk through it. And we've, I've suggested both sides of it, which is, I mean, what is the worst, what is the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario if you stay? What's the worst case scenario if you leave? What's the best case scenario if you stay? What's the best case scenario if you leave? And like, let's talk through that. And there's been times where, most of the times when I'm on the receiving end of that conversation, it's not a Nija. That's not who most of the people going in the transfer portal are. They're kids who are just like, some of them have never played. They don't have stats yet. Some of them got hurt. Some of them, there's much more gray stories of whether the transfer portal is going to be a good decision for them. And we have to talk through that. And I think my conversations have been a lot of the same, which is, why are you feeling unhappy? Like, how much of that is in your control? Should you, are you going to go to another situation and have the same factors, And so many of the times it's like, if they don't feel like they're getting opportunities or, there's things like that. It's like, well, what's to say you're going to do that when you switch? And I think those are really the conversations that we have to be having, which is, there's no guarantee anywhere you go that it's just going to be this amazing experience. There were, my senior year, my junior year, I thought about leaving WashU. And my senior year, I thought about quitting softball for a little bit. There are times where it's hard. You're also going through a tough time in your life and you're in the transition age. And I think just really trying to be rooted in all of that. I think this year of the juniors and seniors, I guess, of the committed kids of my team, half of their coaches changed this year. So the coaches that they committed to, and it's been such a conversation because, everyone's instant reaction is like, well, should I leave? It's like, well, I don't know. Did you like the school? Like, were you just committing to that person? I think there's an element of look at baseball. It's just like the Texas A&M coach went to the World Series, competed in the series, left and was the Texas coach. Like, I mean, there's just, this stuff is at the end of the day, in the same way players are going to make decisions to get paid, coaches are going to get made, decisions to get paid, employees are going to make decisions to get paid. Like,
it's like putting real life concepts on kids a little bit earlier, essentially. Right. That's what I mean. Yeah. It really is. It's just like a little bit earlier than we typically have asked them to process. And so they need their parental support. There's no doubt about that. They need their parental support, I think, to be able to see through those weeds, because that is a lot to have to understand. And I think it's really about anything in life. There's no scenario, there's no relationship that is perfect, but what are the non-negotiables? What are the preferences? And then what are the things you're I literally don't even care about those things. So, yes, there's a lot that's going to go well, that you're going to like about the school and the program. There's a lot you don't. We have kids that I'm you're going to play for that school. I know that pitching coach is not a player development person. You're not going to have access to data. You're not going to have access to this. Do you care? That's not up to me to tell them that that's bad. Maybe they're honestly, I care a little, but not as much as going to X because of, whatever it is. That's my dream school, or that is the major that I want. And it's, whatever that looks like. And, and if it's it's not as important as the other variable I'm considering, that's not up to anyone else. There are times where athletes are well, I feel like I could anchor it myself. And then we have athletes, obviously, that we know, they've either gotten out of injury, an injury cycle because of a strict player development process. They were very average at best until a solid player development process. And they're just I cannot go back. And so that is a non-negotiable for them. But that doesn't mean it needs to be like that for everybody. So I definitely think it's really a lesson in how to start to do that, instead of thinking until this single person, this single experience fits all the boxes and it's not right for me. Then you're going to find your way. I think that's really when it's the negative like reputation of the transfer portal, like early on, was really about like kids are never happy. They're just jumping ship. They're doing whatever. There is also a little bit of that because I think there is a world, probably also related to social media and highlight reels. You know, this stuff happens in like relationships and adults and stuff, of people thinking like, you know, if it's not exactly what I want, I can find that somewhere else. And the reality is like, you can't. You'll swap those variables, and maybe that swap is a swap that needs to happen, you know, but maybe it's not. So yeah, I think that's the deal, but it's a definitely different world. I think like most things, if it's not an extreme, it's not like it's bad, it's good. It's a little bit of both, but it's a different way to navigate than the game that we used to play in. And yeah, it's taking, kids have got to be a little bit more connected to who they are and what they want and what you would even write on that list of like, you know, non-negotiables, preferences, don't care. And if they can't answer those things, like then that's probably a little scary. So it's like, maybe ask yourself as a parent, like, can my kid answer those things, you know? Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. We had, I think the layers of the transfer portal are like, when we talk about the transfer portal, a lot of times we talk about Nyjah or Jordy Ball or, you know, these big name players who leave, you know, for employment like reasons in most cases. You know, they leave to go to a better place for them to, you know, get paid more, to have, you know, we all talked about Jordy wanting to go home, and that was part of it, but also there's a layer of like a player like her, when you think of like Caitlin Clark, who's in her state, can make more money and get more exposure in there. So there's employment like reasons for a lot of these decisions. And then there's everyone else in the transfer portal. And so and it's a lot of people. And what I find myself having conversations with is like, there are a lot of people that do not come out of that transfer portal. And
I was just going to say that we knew people back in the day that just got lost in there. Yeah.
Well, and still, and I will have conversations, you know, I've had a few conversations in the last couple of years with kids who they didn't play a lot their first year for, you know, for whatever reason, whether it was fair or unfair. Some of them had injuries, whatever. And so I said, like, you don't have stats. You know, it's not so simple to just throw yourself in the transfer portal and think you're going to get picked up. So what we talked about was the worst case scenario is that you don't. And so are you okay taking a year off? Are you okay going down the division? Are you okay? Like, what are you okay with if you go in there? You know, what is sort of the extremes of it? And that's the reality of so many people in the transfer portal. And so I think that also it's like, as the game is changing, and it's not just softball, I think it's certainly women's sports broadly, and probably, you know, a lot of the way that football is changing, and there's men's sports that are changing so much too. But it's like, we almost have to start talking about the game in these two separate pieces. It's like the power four and then the top power four, which is a whole different ball game. And the kids that are playing in there, and then everyone else. And it's not to say that everyone else's experience is bad or less than. You and I certainly don't believe that, but it is different. And so when you're having conversations about the transfer portal, it's like, you're not Nyjah. You're not picking up the phone and talking to 40 schools and, you know, seeing who's going to pay you the most. Like that, this is not what most people's transfer portal experience is. So I think there's also this idea that it's like, sometimes, you know, this is not nice, but sometimes I see kids like announce themselves in the transfer portal, and I'm like, does anyone even see this post? Like you're just, you know, this is a random person who like didn't play at some small school or whatever it is. And so it's like, you know, just, I think that's really, you know, you got to be truthful about what your experience and level is too. And there's a difference, and it's not just D1 and everyone else either. And D1, like we said, there's all these different thresholds of experiences in there. And I think that transition is just, we're really in it. And I think about, like, I was just talking about the WNBA, because I've, like, you know, it's not cool as someone who likes women's sports, but I'm like, you know, now I'm into it. But I think that I was saying, like, it feels like women's sports was this like exclusive club that was really cool. And we all, like, you know, we had the experience as women's sports fans to be a part of it and to follow the Sue Birds and these pioneers in it. And now though, we're sort of in this process of like, oh, it's not this little exclusive club anymore. There's everyone now. WNBA is everywhere, and now it's selling out stadiums. And now, Joe Schmo on Twitter has something to say about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and all of these people and their dynamics. And so I feel like they're, college sports, women's sports, we're all in this like weird transition as growth is happening, and growth is positive, but of like, how do we manage growth? How do we manage growth? How do we manage softball players getting paid in college? How do we manage the professional game becoming something more, a career that people can have? How do we manage more fans that have input and are visible on social media and speak negatively about the players and have a voice, to sort of do that? How do we manage all of this? And I think it's like, if you are sending a player to manage that, and especially as they're still a child, like the only way they're going to manage that in a healthy environment is to just try to make them as resilient as possible. And they're not going to be resilient by avoiding it, or by not having a voice in it, or by not being sort of like upfront with the realities of it. It's just not going to work. And now you're going to send them onto the other side of it, and just, sort of unarmed in a world that's changing very rapidly, and that we all don't exactly know like what it's going to look like. So I just think that's the important part of all of this. Just like trying to make these women go into it as resilient as possible. Now we're going to really change it up, because I'm going to do a question from Trisha that has nothing to do with any of this. So we're going to do a 360 here.
I have been on a soapbox as of lately about the issue I have with us putting a big ball in a smaller overall hand. What are your thoughts on that? Why do we go to the 12-inch ball, A, at all? And B, why do we go to the 12-inch ball and move them back to 43 feet at such an early age?
We've talked about this before, and obviously I don't know that we like know the answer to this, because how would we know the answer to what is the appropriate side? This is a pitching question, obviously. My brain went to just overhand throwing. That's where we've sort of talked about it a lot. And I think it's very clear that the ball size in young girls impacts negatively overhand throwing mechanics. I think that like just 100% we see just like much more pushy throws. I think it's just so hard for them to like really fire it. They look, even when they grab a plyo and they can squeeze it, or a smaller, baseball, they just throw it so much differently. So I think from an overhand throwing perspective, we've seen that through some of our throwing stuff. And I think what has helped us is just having kids throw plyos, because they can manipulate the plyo a little bit different. And that has helped overhand throwing. I don't know that it makes, I don't know the answer. I don't know if it makes sense to have them do drills with a smaller ball, because like, is that setting them up for a different skill? Like, I think there's a question about that, because the ball is big. So I don't know how much off of the ball size you want to go from a training standpoint. I think it just, I don't know, you'd have to kind of play around with that, I think. But plyos have helped overhand throwing. I think you'll probably say something similar, but I think there's no doubt about it. It impacts things, but it is our game. So like, what does impact mean? Like, it's interesting. Like it's a different skill when you're throwing a 12-inch ball underhand, versus a tiny baseball. So I think, and I'm curious your thoughts on pitching, but
it's just when the size of the ball is so much larger than the athlete's hand, it's bad arm action. It's why we have bad arm action in softball. Like, news flash, we have bad arm action. Like, it takes us so long, and it's so much work. It's why people that have good arm action, meaning they can segment, they can unravel, that they create ball flight data, that they instantly become like elite, because the majority of people don't have any, they don't have good, arm action. And that's why, I mean, it's just like, you need obviously to be able to control the ball. If you can't, you have to squeeze it. And if you squeeze it, then you create rigidity. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So no, it's not good. There's a couple of things. I got two things I want to comment on it. And one is, if I guess I had to say, how would you get around that? One is I would make sure you're right, plyos for sure. I would make sure that athletes were spending more time on things like plyos than on the softball, but giving them just enough softball to connect to the game, and knowing that there's an element of training that you're just trying to prep to make them okay for the game, but also you're trying to preserve their ability to like keep growing, because they're just constantly throwing, like a ball that's too big for them, then yeah, they're going to develop poor arm action. I mean, it's the same concept of like when you overthrow when you're young for a variety of reasons, it's typically lowering your ceiling. You're not aware of it, but for most people, it's actually lowering their ceiling and making their obstacles or hurdles a little bit higher for when they get into these like high school ages, because they're so like capped in some things. Now you can get out of rigid arm action. I mean, like that's easier than really broken down patterns. We watch athletes train out of rigid arm action all the time, but if we wanted them not to have to do that, that would be a consideration. What I really, as far as, ball size, well, I think about stuff like this all the time, because I'm like, who the hell made these rules, and like what is it based off of? Like every once in a while, it was like a week ago or something, I had someone come in for an assessment, and her like stance, her dominant foot was on the rubber and her non-dominant foot was like, 2 feet off the rubber, like a really wide starting stance, or like long, I guess you could say. I haven't seen that in a while. And I was like, okay, so I wanted to talk to her about how that keeps her from activating the posterior side of her dominant side, yada, yada, yada. Basically talking to her about like why I think it'd be good to come back. And what I ended up explaining to her is like, listen, the rule for a really long time was that both feet had to be on the rubber. Both feet had to be on the rubber. And then when you actually do that, your base of support
it's insane.
Why
we did that.
Small, and then it's like shift your weight during it. It's like literally that. Why was that the rule? And then they were like, okay, so then when we were told you don't have to be on the rubber, it was like such a celebration, because that was literally freaking impossible, So then it was like, okay, so now we want to take advantage. And in reality, what we're really just looking for is a solid base of support, right? Which is probably like just wider than like where your hips are and such. And so it's just like a good base of support, nothing too, narrow and nothing too wide. And then I was thinking like, okay, remember when that rule first changed just a handful of years ago, and they were like, the young kids can step and the older kids have to stay. And we had our hands on some like tech, like some 4D, and like, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at, but I knew enough to know what instability was looking like. There was literally like a shakiness in the graph when you were looking at instability. And so it was like a lie detector test, it was like, like going up and down. And so I was like, okay, the rule just changed. We should look. And it didn't matter like what age, when athletes were stepping back, their level of pelvic instability was so much higher. And I'm like, okay, we definitely didn't consider this, because why would you give the rule that created more instability to the little kids? Like let's step and then go, and create the rule that allowed them to have more stability, like to the athletes that actually have a little more stability. And so things like that often make me think like, who the hell is the guy or the woman, like behind the scenes Wizard of Oz style, making these rules, and like show us what it's based on? Like, damn. And even like now you're going 12-inch ball and 43 feet, 40 feet, same time. It's like, has anyone applied some sense of like science to any of this? So I definitely feel like I would like to be more educated on where are these coming from? Isn't it time to start to challenge some of these things? But that stuff's on my brain all the time. Now, we don't really work with young kids, like little kids. We don't have athletes throwing like 11-inch balls, 35 feet. Like Josh, our pitching coach, his daughter comes in, and does it because she's Josh's daughter. So like I'll watch her doing it and stuff, but like we just are always like throw plyos, man. And you know how I feel about, I'm like, I love kids. I love little kids. I've got my own kids. I love their spirit. I love their freedom. They're a little bit unhinged. I love that about them, but they don't mix with pitching. It's too complex. It's too complicated. Keep them from pitching until they're like 13 years old, And so I just think that, well, we aren't like hands-on in that young age bracket right now. We know too much about stability, about rigidity, about, why obviously the size of the hand matters. I mean, I say in almost every debrief that I give, like it's important to understand that in baseball, with the overhand slot with a, the size of the baseball, pitchers can get around the ball, behind the ball, and inside the ball. They literally can change their slot all the way around the ball. And because of the size of the ball and our underhand slot, we only typically get inside the ball or just behind the ball. Like our window of where our hand and our fingers can manipulate the ball, it's already so small. And so then if you think if the hand now is smaller, like you can't get anywhere on that. So yeah, I just don't think it's based in anything. And I'm sort of like, well, that's not good enough. I guess that's how I feel. But also, I guess I'm not like offering to be the person that changes the rules. I just would like there to be some sort of like, like we're not single-handedly trying to go after the rules of the game, but like, does this ever come up in discussion? Will it ever?
Yeah. I think I think where I go with this stuff is like in softball, there's no development guidelines anywhere. I mean, this is a real challenge with that game. So like USA softball has its limitations on how much power it has at the youth level. And there's no standards for anything. So it's like, I go watch my sons play hockey, and at certain ages, there are certain changes that happen. So it's like you are 6 and under, all you can enter into is learn to skate or learn to play, which is drills and things like that. And then you're 7 and the court, you're 3-on-3, and the court, the rink is this size.
I don't watch hockey. I'm like, that sounds right.
Whatever. And then you're, 4-on-4, and soccer's the same. It's like, it's not perfect. The youth system is a mess everywhere. So it's not like they nailed it. No one's nailed it right now.
Thoughtfulness about its progression.
But it's like, it's this size, it's this many players, it's,
Krista,
this is
about literally
what it goes to. And it's like, where do you find that in softball?
Every day I explain to someone like how we design like environmental design and training from plyos into their like immediate fastballs. I'm like, we change one variable at a time, because if you are going to keep progressing and developing, if the brain is trying to manage multiple variables at once that have changed, it's going to be chaos. Like that's basic motor learning concepts.
The 11-inch ball is so hard. I think that all the time is like, the 11-inch ball is so much harder, solid core than the 12-inch ball. And so it's like when kids start throwing hard at 10U, everyone's like, get this kid back to 40 feet. She's going to kill someone. So I also think there's a question of like, why is the 11-inch ball so hard? And like,
I don't know.
Why is it like, so I think there's a lot of things, one big thing that's really open a can of worms is that also 8U, 10U, we're moving the pitching rubber, but the bases are 60 feet the whole time. And so the other thing that's crazy is that they like
that's
bunt
right
and just
like
the contact. Like they play at a full field. We never play on, besides the pitching rubber, we never ever in softball don't play on a full field. And so I think
they're like, it's small
that
enough.
like so it's like, and like my son, my 8-year-old played on a softball field in baseball. Like he didn't go play 90 feet in a mound and like, and even that,
they do that when they're
at 8U, even them playing on a and even them playing on a softball field, still, if someone hit it to the shortstop, they were safe because they couldn't even throw it, that far. So it's like, I think that the, where these questions get answered is in, as we are trying to grow the game and be better, continue to develop more and more players, some thoughtfulness around what that looks like. And I think it's not a question that is missing in softball. I mean, you cannot argue with that. There is none of that. The people running the rules, there are some governing bodies. So there's USSSA, there's PGF has rules, there's, NSA, it's like those are, and NAFA, there's these, I'm playing in this sanction, and they just take things from the top and then they adopt them a tiny bit for the youth. They change them a little bit for the youth, which is why they,
that like sports science,
I was just gonna say,
channel, like sports science channel, where it's like you think this and it's like breaks it down. We need something like that to show like the negative implications on if someone does this versus this.
Right. You can read. I mean, like, so, like, I think it's Denmark. They had like this run in international soccer that was terrible. And so they like, we had to do stuff at the youth. And what theirs became centered around was that in soccer, it was clear that soccer players got better the more touches they had when they were young. And so they were like, the game has to be about getting kids as many touches as possible, which is what hockey is actually designed on too. They have to touch the puck or the ball as much as possible. And so they were like, okay, so we can't have a goalie at the beginning because they have to be able to just shoot and dribble. What are the amount of players that we have to have for them to get as many touches as possible? Shooting, like they need to be good at shooting. That's a key thing. So everyone has to be able to like shoot as much as possible. And so I think like, okay, when you start to ask those questions about softball, it's like very similar, I would say, is that they need as many touches as possible at the young ages. They need to throw the ball as cleanly and as often as possible. Like they need to all be, you know, we've already had this conversation, but they need to all be involved in pitching. And certainly a 9-on-9 game on a full field is not accomplishing many of those tasks. So I think like there's just some reality that we just haven't had these same questions. We aren't debating these same things. And so I think that's where we have to start, you know? So really getting to the root of that and trying to, and I think it's complicated because in the instances I'm talking about, you know, there's certainly challenges, and you can read about, like I was reading about soccer has some competing things in the USA. And it's not, like I said, this is not to say those places are perfect, but in soccer and hockey, at least, you know, the governing bodies they're strong, you know. USA hockey, it's like my kid is 6 and he had to be registered for USA hockey to go do rec, you know, whatever. Like it's a very strong governing body. And so everyone looks to them for the rules. And so whatever sanction you are, you still look to USA softball. And I just think or USA hockey, and in softball, we don't have that. So I just don't know. I don't know how you start to like look at development, but I think like there's very clearly a lot of issues at the youth level with how we're trying to develop kids, and very unthoughtful rule changes at the youth level. You know, unthoughtful.
Yeah, you just make the game at 8, 9, and 10 literally look like and have the same goals and measurements as you do when you're 20. I mean, it's literally, and then the parents treat their 10-year-olds like they're 20. Right. Well, why the hell do you think they treat them like they're 20? You know, like you got to have this, you got to everything.
Right.
Like,
well, and then my 8-year-old son is like, I'm not playing baseball. What a snooze, you know, because it's the same, you know, and there's even some scaling in baseball, but still, it's like, what a boring game. I'm not playing this. So this is like never touch the ball. I never do anything. I can't hit it unless I'm, you know, an early bloomer and I can hit this 62-mile-an-hour pitcher. Like we see that all the time. There's kids playing 10U and they're like, she throws so hard. We're like, oh, how hard does she throw? And they're like 58. And then that kid throws 58 forever. It's like, what are we doing? We've created, yes, 58 from 35 feet is really cooking, but 58 is not hard when she gets older.
It's like
so
basing 76 just created this college, like, man.
Right. I told you I went to a game. It was like a really good, I had to work a tournament. This was years ago at this point, but it's a 10U championship game. I had to put headphones in because I was just like, this is cuckoo. This was like 4 years ago. Everyone was going nuts. But there was a clearly post-puberty kid as a pitcher, and then this teeny tiny catcher who was very good, but like tiny. The kid, I went and like clocked the kid because I was like, how hard is this kid throwing? 62 from 35 feet.
Right.
She was like blowing the catcher away. The catcher kept dropping third strikes, and the people were like, catch the ball. I'm like, what?
Yeah, you're like, just don't die.
So it's like,
right.
And
I think if I went to a travel softball field and the kids were like 8, 9, 10, I would have to like stand on the top of the hill and just yell like, this isn't really pitching. Like none of this is real. Like I just would have to like yell that. None of this is real. You all think
I had to go. I told you I had to go to the 8U. I had to meet at a bar at 8:30 on a Tuesday night to help decide the 8U all-star team for my son's rec. And I just kept saying, at one point I literally said out loud, like I don't know how to reiterate that I do not care. No, here are my top 4 kids on my team.
Think kids should
and they were like,
game.
Totally.
No, go ahead,
but they were like, you know, that. Like this kid, he's pretty good, but he's really raw. And I said, he's 8. Like,
Right,
what?
totally. What are you talking about? I think I love the game for kids because I just love like, the like literally the unhinged element of just like Sandlot style. You know what I mean? Like I want the game to be the Sandlot
so fun
for all the little kids and for them like, and that is probably because I was like supposed to be born in like 1965 or something, but I'm like literally I just like think that that's what the game should be about. But what I'm in love with in the game, as you know, is the complexity of like the problem solving, particularly of pitching where it's been so neglected, where like people haven't put the right work and mindset into like how to get it done and how to maximize it. And what is it? How do we influence it? It's like, and I just think like that's not a world where kids belong in, they belong in the game, but they belong in the game for all the like soul reasons, but they don't belong in the game the way the way the game like actually exists. And so that's why I like see them through such different lenses. And I think like for me personally, I spend so much of my time helping athletes like regain things, repattern things, undo things. So I care about it. And then I also care about it because I'm like, when you treat the game like it's more mature than it should be early on, kids like fall out of love with it. And then like that I hate because that's not Sandlot. That's not the Sandlot story. The Sandlot kids freaking loved it. So I care about it from that standpoint. But it's just like two different worlds. It should be two different worlds.
Right. And to answer the question for Trisha is like, no, totally crazy, totally bonkers. Seems to be based on nothing. So figure out a way to get
who are the Wizard of Oz people making these rules behind the curtains is what I want.
Get them in a room together and let's talk about rules for like development. And that's all the way to cycle back. If we want to talk about growing the game, that's how you do that at the youth level, is like to be thoughtful about development in a way that like actually develops kids. It keeps them in it. What are the skills we're trying to develop? Are we doing that? Is the game structured in a way to do that? We already know pitching is a huge issue. So like this is one of the conversations that should be being had about it, is if we want more pitchers, we probably need a ball size that's different. We got to be thoughtful about the distances they're throwing. We got to be thoughtful about all these things. So I think doesn't seem to be a lot of thought, and prove us wrong, I guess, if there was a lot of thought or there's some sort of like study on the distances, and send it our way. Curious to read it, but I think it's
what I was just thinking, Krista. A couple 2 years ago, we were at the NFCA convention, went to a Rapsodo dinner, and Cindy Brister came up to us and she was like, "I love you guys. You just like say whatever you want." And I was like, "Yeah, that's true, because we're not like like we don't have compliance, like HR banging on our door.
You're
so
right.
we're pretty free to be like, who are these thoughtless people? But that's how we feel, I don't know, that's how we feel. So that's what we're going to say. And maybe it's been very thoughtful and we just don't are in alignment with it. I don't know. But how it feels to us is that it's thoughtless and that these people are the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. So damn it, that's what we're going to say.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I don't know. Feels like we nailed it. So we'll end on that. And on that note, next week, next week we'll be in our normal places at our normal time recorded. So we'll see how that goes. But this is the summer. This is softball in the summer. I'm not in a random place now. I guess I'm in Denver, but normally I'm in one random city.
You're in Colorado with the rest of America right now, basically.
Totally. They called today we went whitewater rafting. It was our off day, and the guide told me that they called this softball week. And he said that today they had the most floaters ever in their whole history in one day today.
Sure they did.
And I was like, that's.
I called it the other day. I said to an athlete,
sending on Denver. So
this isn't what it usually looks like here, but it's Colorado week. She's like, "What's Colorado week?" I'm like, "Colorado week." Like, what do you mean? It's like everyone is there. If they're not playing, they're coaching. If they're not coaching, they're with a sibling. They're with a child. They're with somebody. You're some way connected to someone who's playing in Colorado, so you're in Colorado. That's just the way it goes. If you're connected to the game, you're in Colorado, basically.
Totally.
Yeah.
Way to go, Triple Crown. You really good plan. All right.
Godspeed out there. Thanks for listening.